They don't sweep you off your feet right away. No fireworks, no overwhelming love bombing like narcissists usually do. They come slower, subtler. They listen to you, really listen, or at least make you believe they do. They remember every tiny detail you once shared, the sleepless night, the scar on your hand, the childhood story you told when you thought no one was paying attention. Then, weeks later, they bring it up again softly, naturally, and you feel your heart opening. Finally, someone cares about those little things. You think it's connection. In reality, it's the first time you're being read. There are two kinds of dangerous people in this world. Those who feel nothing and those who feel everything but have no ethics. The first destroys you with indifference. The second destroys you with your own emotions. Carl Jung called them shadow empaths. Empaths who live in the dark. They don't need the power of domination. They only need you to hand that power over by believing they understand you. You won't see any alarms, no warning bells, no obvious toxic signs, only a feeling of familiarity, a closeness so safe that you don't realize you're being decoded. They study every breath, every pause in your speech. When you're sad, they breathe with you. When you're silent, they're silent too, in perfect rhythm, not out of harmony, but calibration. You're being calibrated to open the door. And when the door is open, they don't rush in loudly like a narcissist. They simply stand there, smiling, waiting for you to invite them. Because they know, once you believe this is the person who understands you the most, you will hand over the keys yourself. The dark empath doesn't want to dominate you. They want to shape you. They take your own language, your feelings, your fears, then hand them back to you in a new form, a cage called love. That's why they're more dangerous than narcissists. Because narcissists make you guarded, but they make you surrender. With a narcissist, you know you're being hurt. With a dark empath, you believe it's love. They don't need to rush. They don't attack you with a storm of charm. They don't overwhelm you with hollow compliments. They quietly infiltrate bit by bit through conversations that seem harmless. A text that arrives later than usual, a short question, but perfectly on point. A look that lingers a few seconds too long. They don't break the door down, they just knock. And when you open, they don't step in right away. They stand there, waiting for you to invite them. Because the dark empath knows anyone will be wary of an attack, but almost no one is wary of being understood. They begin by remembering. Not to care, but to build a map. Every detail you share, a wound, a belief, a time you laughed through tears, is stored away like puzzle pieces. You think you're being heard, but in reality, you're feeding them data. They don't need to ask more, only to stay silent long enough for you to volunteer the rest. When you say, "I don't trust easily," they give a small, soft smile and lower their eyes. That gesture makes you believe you've just met someone safe. In fact, you've just handed them the exact coordinates of your weakest door. From there, they don't hurry. They observe. They test. A comment that triggers a reaction, a compliment that lands exactly where you crave recognition. When you laugh, they laugh. When you're angry, they know exactly when to soften their voice. Each of your reactions is stored like muscle memory. They study you the way a researcher studies prey, not with reason, but with an intuition trained by pain, because they too were once hurt. They too were once the child who wasn't heard, who was manipulated. But instead of healing, they learned to manipulate back. That's where empathy mutates. From a capacity to connect into a skill for control. From understanding into a weapon. Carl Jung once said, "The shadow does not disappear when we look away. It only becomes more subtle." The dark empath is living proof of this. They use past pain to justify how they read people. They believe that understanding someone gives them the right to lead them. And you, with your genuine heart, are the perfect environment for them to operate. Because you're real. Because you believe in redemption. Because you still think that if someone understands you, they won't hurt you. But you forget, understanding is not the same as caring. The one who understands you the most may be the one who knows exactly how to break you without leaving a trace. They don't need to lie much, just half-truths, half-hiding. A drop of sincerity in an ocean of calculation. You feel safe, but you can't explain why you're growing more exhausted. Every conversation with them is like a subtle test. What you say, how they respond, how long they wait when you're silent. All of it is logged into an invisible archive. At some point, you begin adjusting yourself to fit them. Not because they force you, but because you're afraid of losing the sense of connection. And that's when they've won. No coercion, no blatant deception. They only need to make you believe that with them, you get to be yourself. But the self you're showing is the version they've calibrated. At that point, love is no longer about giving. It's about handing over power. You're not just giving your heart, you're handing them the map of your soul. And once they have that map, every road back to freedom is marked. They begin to test their power. Not loudly, not obviously, just small changes you don't notice. One time they cancel your plans at the last minute and you say, it's okay. Next time they ask you to move your schedule because I really need you today. You hesitate, then agree. They see it the way you shrink yourself a little to avoid disappointing someone, and in that moment they know they can do it again and again. This is how the dark empath builds power, not by force, but by your consent. Each boundary loosened a millimeter, each principle bent just this once. They know one time can become a habit. When you think you're being compassionate, they know you're falling into their rhythm. Step by step, they rebuild the world around you, and you don't even realize the ground is tilting. This mechanism of manipulation isn't random. It's emotional mathematics. They give, then withdraw, then give again. Every time they go silent, you feel uneasy. Every time they return, you feel relief. The brain learns fast. The person who hurts you is also the one who can soothe you, so you seek them more, trust them more. Jung called this possession by the shadow, when a part of your unconscious surrenders to a part of theirs. They don't need commands to control you, only emotional pacing. When you're happy, they stand beside you. When you're unsettled, they step back. The sense of loss makes you chase, and at that moment they have your submission without a word. This is when they turn empathy into strategy. Every concerned question has a purpose. Every gentle gesture a return on investment. They don't want to know what you feel to comfort you. They want to know to predict you, predict to control, predict to stay half a step ahead, always making you think they understand you better than you understand yourself. And you begin to believe it. You believe that if someone knows you this deeply, they couldn't possibly harm you. But that is exactly when they harm you quietly, precisely, without violence. The dark empath is a master at turning emotion into a one-way street. They make you believe your love can redeem them, that if you're patient enough, gentle enough, sincere enough, you'll heal them. But that love doesn't save anyone. It only drains you. Because while you're loving, they're collecting. While you're trying to understand, they're measuring. While you think you're building a special bond, they're building a cage with your own language, with your own memories. And by the time you realize everything is already in their hands, they know what you'll say before you say it. They know when you'll cry, how to soothe you, how to make you laugh, and how to make you go silent. They've become the narrator of your story, and you just a character they've written. No one knows when you lost control, not by a single blow, but by hundreds of moments of being understood, not through fear, but through trust. This is the most sophisticated form of power, making someone feel voluntary in their own dependence. The more power they hold, the subtler they get. Eventually, the manipulation stops being questions and answers, or giving and taking, and becomes the air you breathe. They alter your habits without you noticing. Your sleep schedule, your circle of friends, how you use social media, even the dreams you once cherished. Bit by bit, they erase your old traces and replace them with a new script where they are the center. You find yourself checking their reaction before you speak, cutting pieces of yourself to avoid upsetting them. You call it care, but in truth, it's conditioning, like a rat pressing a lever hoping for a reward. They use what neuroscience calls intermittent reinforcement, sometimes warmth, sometimes coldness. Your brain becomes addicted to the relief of being welcomed back in, addicted to the high of being forgiven, soothed, held after they've drained you. That's the trap. They're not the savior. They're the one who sets the fire and then holds the hose. By this stage, you've been drawn in so deeply there's no chain required. You self-censor, you walk into the cage yourself, you find ways to please. And this is what makes them more dangerous than the narcissist. The narcissist takeover is obvious. The dark empath makes you volunteer. You no longer know where your boundaries are. Each time you try to set one, they flip the vulnerable switch, tell their sad story, and you step back out of pity. You think, they didn't mean it. They're wounded too. I should be understanding. And that's the moment they win yet again. Carl Jung called this part of the shadow possession when someone else's energy infiltrates you through the very openings you created out of kindness. A dark empath doesn't just try to control you. They try to become part of your nervous system. They want you to react to them without thinking. And then one day when you wake up, you realize you're no longer yourself. But there's a truth they don't expect. Their power only exists as long as you keep supplying data. Every word you speak, every expression you show, every time you explain, every time you soothe, it's all fuel for their map. When you stop revealing, that map fades. When you no longer respond according to their script, their moves slide off course. This is the art of starving the data, the only way to break a dark empath's grip without war. Stop giving them the right to read you. It's at that point that their true face appears. Your silence doesn't just irritate them, it removes the one thing that made them strong. Predictability. If they can't predict, they can't control. If they can't control, they lose their role as guide. And when they lose that role, all that's left is the empty shadow they've always been hiding. This is the transfer of power. If you can withstand the brief chaos of their reaction, you'll see clearly the warmth that once dazzled you was only a tactic. The smiles, the nods, the caring words were just tools. You're not losing the person who understood you most. You're reclaiming yourself. And when you look back, you understand why the dark empath is more dangerous than the narcissist. The narcissist makes you guarded. The dark empath makes you surrender. Then one day, when they realize their usual tricks no longer work, the dark empath switches tactics. They don't attack, don't demand, don't punish. They pretend to collapse. They become quiet, weak, adrift. The way their voice trembles when they say, "You don't understand me anymore," is calculated to trigger your savior instinct. They know pity is the back door to the heart. And you, still holding a shred of compassion, hesitate. They don't need you to come back completely. Just a door cracked open and they'll slip in like a breath. But this time it's different. You sense something no longer fits. Every word sounds familiar, every gesture still warm, but beneath that softness you feel an emptiness. You realize being understood no longer makes you feel safe, it makes you tired. The gaze that once reassured you now makes you hold your breath, and in that silence you know the game is over. When a dark empath loses access to your inner world, they panic, not because they've lost you, but because they've lost the map. Without data, they don't know how to respond. They start sending mixed signals, sweet then sharp, apologizing then blaming, weak then critical. They're trying to rebuild the script, but this time, you're no longer the actor. You're standing outside watching the old scene play out without wanting to step in. Carl Jung once wrote, "When you realize that another's darkness cannot invade you unless you allow it, you have begun the path to freedom." And indeed, freedom doesn't begin when they let you go. It begins when you stop explaining. When you stop looking for reasons for their behavior, stop trying to prove you're worthy of being understood. You go silent not to punish, but to restore. That silence isn't empty. It's full of awareness. You look back and understand they never truly loved you. They loved the power your trust gave them. They loved how you made them feel influential, important. But you're no longer that power source. You've pulled the plug. And like all darkness, Without someone else's light to reflect, they begin to dissolve. That's when they reveal their true form. No more refined smiles, no more sweet tones, only emptiness, bitterness, and sometimes fear. Because the dark empath isn't truly strong. They've only been borrowing other people's emotions to exist. When you leave, they don't just lose prey, they lose the psychic structure that made them feel real. And in that void, you see clearly, they're not powerful, just a lost soul using understanding as a fortress to avoid facing themselves. And you step out of that maze not in triumph, but in stillness. You don't need revenge, you don't need to prove anything. You only need to live again. You learn to speak less, but deeper. To give less, but to the right people. Empathy is still a gift, but no longer an unlocked door. It becomes a compass pointing you toward respect, not toward control. This is the stage Jung called individuation, the rebirth of the authentic self. When you're no longer controlled by someone else's shadow, you begin to dialogue with the shadow inside yourself. You recognize the part that was manipulated is the part that was never fully loved. When you learn to love that part, the game truly ends. Because a person with inner sovereignty, someone who holds their own energy, no longer needs to be understood, no longer needs to be chosen, is someone neither the narcissist nor the dark empath can read. And that is the pinnacle of freedom, not becoming cold, but becoming ungovernable by the very things that once wounded you. Here, you start to notice the transformation inside you. No longer led, you become the observer. Each time they try to send a familiar lure, your heart no longer races. Each gentle word doesn't melt you, but makes you more awake. You see every tactic, every beat. They tell a sad story to pull you back. You no longer feel pity, you see strategy. They send a message at your weak moment. You no longer react instantly, you see it as a signal. This awareness doesn't make you bitter, it makes you calm. In that calm, you discover a skill you didn't know you had. Discernment, choosing who gets access to you, choosing what to share, choosing when to open the door. This isn't a cold wall, it's the art of protecting yourself. You're no longer living in defense, you're living in sovereignty. You no longer run from the shadow, you recognize it. And once you recognize it, it loses its power. Carl Jung called this the light of consciousness. When you shine light into darkness, it dissolves like mist. A dark empath is only powerful when their darkness mixes with the darkness inside you. When you dare to look at that part, dare to love it, dare to protect it, they have no entry. You don't need to fight them, expose them, or prove anything to anyone. You just need to stop playing. And when a game loses its players, it vanishes. You find yourself restoring the things you once forgot. Small habits, old hobbies, plans you once set aside. You notice your breathing deepen, your sleep improve, your mind stops spinning. You start to rewrite your story, no longer a script they wrote, but a journey you choose. In this new story, you're no longer the character being led, but the narrator. You don't need someone to understand you to feel enough. You don't need someone to see you to feel real. This is the summit of the journey. You reclaim control not through violent force, but through inner clarity. You turn empathy from a weakness into a skill. You don't close your heart, you open it consciously. You don't stop loving, you love with discernment. And what makes you strongest isn't your ability to block someone else's darkness, but your ability to stop letting their darkness enter you at all. This is when they look at you and no longer recognize you. The buttons that once made you laugh or cry no longer work. The apologies, the touches, the I understand you fall into a void. They no longer have a map, no shortcuts, no levers. They may try anger, pity, disappearing, but you stand there silent, steady. And in that silence, you not only free yourself from them, you free them from their own game. And then you understand. You never lost your empathy. You simply learned to protect it. Your empathy is no longer an open door without conditions. It's a lamp you place where you choose. And that's what makes you untouchable. Not because you become cold, but because you become conscious. You're no longer a supply for someone else's game. You're the author of your own script. This is the part they never anticipated. You don't need them to be special, and you don't need them to feel lovable. You found your own center. And at that center, all manipulation dissolves. All false power collapses. You don't need to defeat anyone. You only need to step out. And when you step out, the first thing you notice isn't joy. It's emptiness. A silent, spacious emptiness that sometimes makes you want to go back just to feel something. Because for so long they made you believe chaos was connection, anxiety was love, control was care. Now, when the noise of that game stops, you feel estranged from your own peace. Many people can't stand this stage. They call it loneliness. But in truth, it's recovery. It's your body, mind, and soul relearning how to function without someone else's supervision. You begin to notice your small, erased habits. The way you used to play music in the morning, loved walking in the rain, loved silence. You realize these things never disappeared. They were only hidden under a fog of fear and conditioning. And when the fog lifts, you see your own face in the mirror, not the face they once understood, but the true face, untouched, unreflected by anyone. Jung once wrote, "No one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The darkness you lived through wasn't a curse. It was a lesson. It taught you the boundary between empathy and surrender, between love and self-loss, between being seen and being possessed. And when you understand that, you're no longer afraid of darkness. You can look at it, smile, and say, 'I know you, but you're no longer my master.' From that moment, every new connection you build will be different. You'll recognize immediately when someone tries to read you instead of wanting to know you. You'll distinguish the eyes that truly see you from the eyes looking for an entry point. You'll no longer feel the need to prove your worth by being understood, because you already understand yourself. And that is what a dark empath can never touch: self-awareness. Gradually, you rediscover the beauty of stillness. You see the power in not reacting, in letting silence speak. You realize your kindness doesn't need to be loud, doesn't need to prove itself. It only needs boundaries. You begin to love without rescuing, to give without needing recognition, to help without losing yourself. Empathy is no longer a weakness, but a form of wisdom. And when someone asks you, "How do I stop getting hurt?" you'll smile and say, "You don't need to avoid pain. You just need not to repeat it." And a dark empath may make you doubt your own light, but they also unwittingly become your guide, because through them, you've learned how to look into darkness without losing your compassion. And when you can do that, you step into a new stage of maturity. You no longer need to understand everything, only to be awake enough to know what's worth opening your heart to. Now, you no longer say, "I escaped them, but I returned to myself." Afu, and that is the quietest, deepest victory, the one they could never take from you. In the end, you realize this story was never just about them. It's the story of you, of how you relearned your own language after letting someone else mistranslate it. How you learned to tell the difference between understanding and strategy. How you discovered that kindness isn't an open invitation, but a commitment to your own values. When you step out of the dark empath spiral, you are no longer the same. You are deeper, slower, quieter. You look at people with eyes that have seen darkness and still choose the light. You no longer believe in easy "I understand you" phrases, but in the small actions that keep both people free. You know that empathy is no longer about absorbing everything from someone else, but about feeling without dissolving. A dark empath is more dangerous than a narcissist because they make you confuse love with conditioning. But once you see the game, you not only escape them, you become someone they cannot manipulate. You become living proof of what Carl Jung once said: "There is no awakening without going through darkness, but darkness remains only a lesson when we stop fearing it." Now, you don't need to prove you're strong. You only need to be honest with yourself. You know your silence is a boundary, not an escape. You know your kindness is a choice, not an obligation. You know your light doesn't have to be dazzling to be real. It just has to be true. And then, when someone else approaches, perhaps with the same gentle smile, deep eyes, and voice that knows how to touch your tender spots, you will no longer feel overwhelmed. You will listen, but not dissolve. You will open your heart, but not hand over the keys. Because you've learned the most important thing: empathy is only beautiful when it is no longer a blade in someone else's hand. That's when you truly step out of the shadows, not as a surviving victim, but as an awakened person. You carry your light not to shine on others, but to illuminate the path you walk. And that light is the one thing a dark empath can never have: consciousness.